two points I'm going to make. I'm going to go back to the one that I skipped earlier, and that was a rise in child abuse. Um, and the logic behind that is that children are at home with their parents. Parents are in higher stress situations than normal, which might make the likelihood of abuse to occur more frequently. And also, teachers are not in a position to check on their kids and make the call to the proper organizations, the proper authorities, when child abuse is suspected. And that's all true, it's all a concern. We've even seen studies have shown that domestic violence cases have gone up since the lockdown started back in March. But there has to be a better way to address it than just sending kids back to school. Obviously, teachers are the most common um, reference points, the people who most often report child abuse. But that's, I mean, that's definitely a problem, but this is a really hard issue that can't just be addressed with something as simple as, oh, just send them all back to school. Because there are different problems that arise by sending them back to school. I'm not going to say that abuse isn't a problem, that it's not a risk, because it absolutely is, but it's not a simple explanation either. I saw one recommendation was that children be checked on by social workers, and that's possible, but again, that's putting somebody else at risk, and that usually only applies to students who are living in like foster care or orphanages. It doesn't really apply to everybody. And you could potentially have wellness checks on students, but again, how you do that is going to be difficult. And that still doesn't take into account the students who were never even registered for school. There are going to be people who just never were registered for public schooling. They're at home, they always have been. So, what do you do in those cases? That's definitely a difficult issue, and I'm not even going to pretend to have the answers on that. Um, but it'll be interesting to see as final decisions start being made, what people decide to do in that regard. The final point that I'd like to mention that I found was in regard to teachers. So in the Academy of Pediatrics article, so the question that was posed from the interviewer said that the guidelines emphasize that teachers and school staff members should stay physically distanced to the greatest extent possible and conduct meetings remotely. We kind of already mentioned that. But I am hearing from a lot of teachers. Many are frankly scared to go back to school before a vaccine is available. A few have told me that they feel that their health is treated as expendable. What's your message to them? And the response was, we're pediatricians, we're not educators. We don't want to tread in space where we don't belong. But what I would say is it depends on the level of risk for the individual person. Every district I have talked to here in Colorado, they are making major considerations for their teachers, trying to figure out how to keep them safe. There are a couple of things we know now that we didn't know when we closed schools down in March. One is that masks really do seem to work. They are very effective. Two, physical distancing works as well. If they are taking as many precautions as they can, I think the risk is pretty low. Some of these are very personal decisions, but schools can do a lot of things to really make the environment as safe as possible. First of all, that's assuming that the schools actually can and will. Schools are making safety precautions based on what they have the finances to do. And if the finances aren't there, which we rely on the government for those finances, that funding, we won't really have the ability to put those safety precautions in place. Again, with the masks, that requires everybody to keep them on, and not everybody's going to. It's going to be a battle. It's going to be a new battle that we haven't had to deal with before in the classrooms. And then for teachers, saying that it's a personal decision. It isn't. It's not a choice. If you choose to open up schools, the teachers have to go back. If they don't go back, they're at risk of being laid off. As a preschool teacher, I'm not in a public school. I'm in a private preschool, or I was in a private preschool. They reopened for summer camp. Having respiratory complications to begin with, I did not feel safe going back. And because of that, I was laid off. And a lot of other teachers are going to face that possibility. Some of those teachers may be able to switch to an online position, but it's not as easy as it looks. I mean, I've looked into the online schools near me or the online school programs, and so far none of them have openings that I'm actually qualified for. So it's not as easy as just finding an online job. There will be teachers who make the choice to remain at home for the school year and they will lose their jobs. So, in that regard, yes, teachers are being treated as expendable. The other thing that's still not taking into account is if teachers get sick, you lose those human resources. And as those human resources kind of get pulled out for the time being, you lose the education that you sent them back for in the first place. You want students to be face to face in school because they get better learning, but if their teacher has to leave because they fall critically ill and they can't return and you can't find a sub for that classroom, they're not getting the adequate education that you put them back in there for. Bottom line, it's just not that easy. And I do feel that teachers are being treated as expendable. I know that a lot of doctors are required to do, or people who work in like nursing homes and such, are required to do COVID testing every 2 weeks. And maybe that's something that they might consider for teachers if they do insist on going back. But you can't rely on that either. Testing is still slow. It's still very unpredictable as far as when you'll get the results back. And it is putting teachers in a very difficult place. I don't think it's taking our needs into account. I think we're really being treated as expendable. And that's not fair to teachers. We have treated teachers over the years with so much difficulty, so much disrespect. And this is just one more way that we're not helping our teachers out. We give them so much work to do. We emphasize keeping them on top of their game. We want them to be absolutely perfect. We want them to be in field. We want them to meet this qualification. We want them to do that. We want them to document this progress and do that. There is a lot put on teachers' plate every single day, and this would just be one more thing to worry about, one more thing to have to stress over every night when you go home. Was I put in contact with somebody who had it? Am I at risk of catching it? And it's not fair if you're not going to provide adequate protections for those people.